The sea has always been a stage for legends, and none loom larger than the pirates who once sailed beneath the black flag. Popular tales paint them as fearless adventurers, men who carved freedom from the waves with sword and cannon. Yet the truth is far darker. Life on a pirate ship was no grand adventure. It was a descent into hunger, sickness, and the unrelenting cruelty of the ocean. Below deck, the air was thick with rot and fear. The groan of timber was matched by the scurry of rats, the cough of the sick, and the murmurs of men who knew tomorrow might never come. Salt water corroded their flesh, storms threatened to tear the very world apart, and superstition became as necessary as bread. This was not freedom, but survival. Every day beneath the black flag was a gamble against death, a gamble some chose willingly, and others endured until the sea claimed them. In this story, we strip away the romantic veil and step into the shadows of the pirate's world, where brotherhood was forged in blood. Storms whispered of curses, and the only certainty was the endless horizon. Part 1. The belly of the ship, hunger, rats, and the stench of the sea. The pirate ship was more than just a weapon of war. It was a floating prison of wood and tar, suspended between sea and sky, carrying a cargo not only of stolen goods, but of desperate men who had abandoned one life and chained themselves to another. To step aboard beneath the black flag was to enter a world where the horizon was infinite, yet the space in which you lived, ate, and slept was scarcely wider than a coffin. Beneath the decks, where the daylight died, the belly of the ship reeked of sweat, brine, and rot. The timbers leaked, swollen with salt water, leaving patches of slime along the boards. Every crevice crawled with vermin. Rats the size of small cats scurried across the hammocks, chewing through rope and wood with the same casual hunger that gnawed at the men themselves. Fleas thrived in the seams of their clothing, and lice clung to their scalps until scratching became as natural as breathing. The pirate's world was alive with things that bit, stung, or devoured. Food was never abundant. Pirates feasted when they captured a merchant ship heavy with stores of flour, meat, and rum, but such days were rare. More often, they gnawed on hardtack, slabs of baked flour so dense it could break a tooth. These biscuits were never eaten alone. They came with company worms and weevils tunneling through the dough, leaving it peppered with holes and bitter to the tongue. The men joked bitterly that the extra protein was a blessing, though no one laughed as they swallowed. Salted beef and pork, packed in barrels, quickly turned into putrid masses. The heat of the tropics bloated the meat until it burst its casks, filling the air with a stench so foul it coated the throat. Water, stored in wooden barrels, fared no better. Within weeks, it turned slimy and green, carrying the taste of rot and mold. The crew often mixed it with rum to mask the taste, but rum itself became a curse. It fueled quarrels, mutinies, and the kind of desperate violence that could turn brother against brother. In this belly of shadows, the hierarchy of hunger was cruelly simple. First come, first served. The quartermaster, elected by the crew, portioned out food and drink, but favoritism and grudges often twisted his hand. A man who had earned respect in battle might find his cup filled first, while another, accused of cowardice or laziness, would be handed the dregs, the sour water, the meat crawling with maggots. To protest was to risk the lash, or worse, to be branded a troublemaker in a world where trust was the only currency more precious than gold. Nightfall was the cruelest time. Lanterns flickered low, casting trembling shadows against the curved timbers. Men lay packed together in hammocks, strung side by side, bodies swinging like carcasses in a butcher's stall. Sleep was no relief. The air was too heavy, too foul, thick with smoke from the galley and the sour breath of the sick. Coughs echoed through the darkness deep, rattling coughs that spoke of scurvy, consumption, or fevers carried from distant ports. There were no doctors, no clean beds. A man grew ill, and the crew could only watch as he withered, his gums swelling and bleeding, his skin mottled with sores. Many did not live to see the next shore, and yet, in the suffocating belly of the ship, a strange rhythm of life endured. Gambling was a nightly ritual, with dice carved from bones or cards smuggled from looted decks. Men wagered away their meager rations, their weapons, or even their future share of plunder. Quarrels flared quickly, knives flashing in the dark, but the pirate code demanded order. To kill a shipmate outside of battle was punishable by death. So often the brawls ended in bruises and bloodied lips, not corpses though the line was thin, and tempers easily snapped. Songs, too, filled the void. Rough voices rose together in ballads that spoke of lost loves, far-off taverns, and vengeance against kings and captains who had once enslaved them. The rhythm of the sea seemed to join in, the creak of timbers and the crash of waves merging with their defiant chorus. For many, the song was the only way to drown out the hunger gnawing in their bellies and the darkness pressing against their thoughts. The pirates lived by superstition as much as by steel. In the fetid air of the hold, whispers circled of omens and curses. A sudden swarm of rats was seen as a sign of death to come. A man who whistled below deck was believed to summon storms, and when food spoiled too quickly, or when men fell ill in clusters, it was often blamed on witchcraft or on a cursed object stolen from a doomed ship. Fear spread quickly, and scapegoats were found among the crew. More than one sailor was thrown overboard under the accusation of bringing misfortune upon the voyage. But perhaps the greatest curse of the pirate ship was monotony. Days blended together, marked only by the roll of waves and the scraping of spoons against empty bowls. Time stretched endlessly, punctuated by bursts of violence when a prize ship was sighted, or by the terror of storms. The rest was waiting for hunger, waiting for sickness, waiting for death. Men carved their names into the planks, etched crude symbols of skulls, crosses, or naked women into the wood, as if to leave proof they had existed in this floating purgatory. Above all, the belly of the ship reminded them of what they had left behind. The freedom they sought under the black flag came at the cost of comfort, family, and often sanity. In the dark, some prayed to gods they had long abandoned, whispering into the stinking air as if heaven could hear them across the endless sea. Others cursed their fates and dreamed only of gold, clinging to the hope that one day they would buy a life worth living. Few ever did. The ship was a paradox, a coffin and a cradle, a place of misery and brotherhood. Men suffered together, and in that suffering, bonds were forged stronger than any chain. They learned to trust one another with their lives, to fight as a single beast when cannons roared and blades clashed. Yet at night, as rats gnawed and water dripped from the beams, each man knew the truth. Life aboard a pirate ship was not adventure. It was survival at the edge of the world, lived out in darkness, hunger, and the unrelenting stench of the sea. And so, day after day, the belly of the ship consumed them, grinding their bodies and spirits into shadows. Some endured, hardened into creatures of the ocean who feared nothing but the end of plunder. Others broke, their minds unraveling as the endless horizon mocked their suffering. The sea, indifferent and eternal, swallowed both alike, for beneath the black flag there was no romance, only the grim reality of hunger, rats, and the suffocating belly of the ship. Part 2. When the tempest struck. Fear, rituals, and survival in the storm. The sea could be generous, carrying pirates to fat merchant vessels ripe for plunder. It could be calm and still, a mirror stretching to the horizon. But every man who lived beneath the black flag knew the truth. The sea was not a friend, not a stage for adventure. It was a beast, ancient and merciless. And when the tempest struck, it reminded all aboard just how small, fragile, and doomed they were. It often began with silence. The air grew heavy, thick enough to choke, the horizon blurring as clouds rose like mountains in the distance. A strange light fell across the deck, sickly and pale, turning men's faces into masks of wax. Even the rats grew still, scurrying deep into the hold, as though they sensed what the sailors themselves knew. The storm was coming. First came the wind, a low moan that grew into a howl, snapping sails like whips and sending loose rigging thrashing through the air. The ocean, once steady, heaved as if awakening from slumber, lifting the ship on swells that groaned beneath the timbers. Men scrambled across the deck, tightening ropes, reefing sails, their bodies bent against the rising gale. Orders barked by the quartermaster were swallowed by the roar, leaving the crew to act on instinct and experience. Every hand was needed, every second counted. The storm struck with a violence that could not be measured. Rain lashed like knives, cutting into skin, soaking clothing until it clung like chains. Waves rose higher than masts, their crests foaming white before they crashed upon the deck, sweeping men from their feet. Lanterns were extinguished one by one until the world was reduced to black water and blinding lightning. Thunder cracked like cannon fire, shaking the very bones of the ship, and in the chaos, fear took hold. These were men hardened by bloodshed and cruelty, but against the sea they were powerless. They tied ropes around their waists, securing themselves to the masts to avoid being claimed by the waves. Still, many were dragged screaming into the abyss, their cries swallowed before their shipmates could even look their way. Below deck, the belly of the ship became a coffin. Water poured through the seams, flooding the hold, carrying rats and splintered wood across the floor. Men clung to hammocks as if they were lifelines, their knuckles white in the dim lantern light. The smell of tar, bilge, and fear grew suffocating. Every creak of the timbers sounded like a death knell, each groan of the hull a reminder that the sea had claimed ships far stronger and crews far braver. It was in these moments that ritual took hold. Pirates were practical men, but in the face of storms, they turned to superstition with desperate fervor. Some whispered prayers to saints long forgotten, crossing themselves as waves battered the hull. Others muttered pagan charms, tracing symbols into the wet wood or clutching talismans of bone and feather. There were those who spat defiantly into the gale, cursing the storm as though to prove their fearlessness. But the most chilling rituals belonged to the crew as a whole. If the storm lingered too long, if the waves grew too high and the timbers threatened to splinter, whispers began. A sacrifice was needed. The sea demanded tribute, and someone would have to pay. Sometimes it was an animal, a goat or chicken, kept alive for food, hurled into the waves with a prayer for mercy. Other times, when desperation turned savage, it was a man. A prisoner taken in battle, or a crewman accused of bringing bad luck, would be dragged to the rail. His pleas were lost to the wind as the black flag above whipped furiously. And then he was gone, claimed by the sea in hopes the storm would relent. Even without sacrifice, storms left their marks. Hands blistered from hauling lines, shoulders dislocated by the strain of the wheel, bodies bruised and broken against the mast. When dawn finally broke and the storm receded, the survivors looked more like ghosts than men. Their eyes were hollow, their skins salt-burned and raw, their clothes hanging like rags. They spoke little, for no words could capture the terror of staring into the black mouth of the ocean and realizing how easily it could devour them all. And yet, life went on. The sea showed no pity, no pause. Once the skies cleared, the crew was forced to reckon with the wreckage. Sails shredded to ribbons had to be mended with trembling fingers. Rigging torn loose was restrung, knots tied again and again until they held fast. Broken masts demanded days of labor to repair, while the wounded groaned in their hammocks, treated with little more than rum and ragged cloth. The dead, when the sea had not already claimed them, were given to the waves with solemn ritual. Wrapped in canvas or nailed into planks, they were tipped into the depths as the crew muttered prayers, or curses, or nothing at all. For many, the storm was a reminder of their own mortality. Pirates lived as though each day might be their last, because in truth, it often was. But there was something about surviving a tempest that hardened them. It was said that once a man had looked into the eyes of the storm and lived, he became something else, less a man, more a creature of the sea. The fear remained, but it twisted into a defiance, a dark pride in having survived what should have killed him. Still, storms left scars deeper than flesh. Some men never recovered. They would wake in the night, screaming, reliving the sound of waves crashing over the deck, the sight of comrades vanishing into foam. Others grew silent, their laughter gone, their eyes fixed on the horizon as though waiting for the next storm to rise. There were those who turned to rum with desperate thirst, drowning their fear in drink until it drowned them. The sea had ways of breaking men without ever firing a shot. Storms were the greatest weapon in its arsenal, reminders that no matter how sharp a cutlass or how many cannons a ship carried, the ocean would always be stronger. And yet, paradoxically, it was this very struggle that bound the crew together. Men who had clung to the same rope in the heart of the tempest, who had hauled each other from the brink of death, emerged with bonds forged in salt and storm. Legends grew from these nights. Around the fire in calmer times, pirates whispered tales of ghost ships sighted in the lightning, of drowned sailors rising on the crests of waves, their eyes hollow and mouths filled with seawater. Some claimed to have heard voices in the wind, mothers, lovers, or enemies long dead, calling them into the abyss. These stories were not told for entertainment. They were warnings, reminders that the sea was haunted by every soul it had claimed, and that one day, each man aboard would join them. The storm, then, was more than weather. It was a trial, a ritual of passage. To be a pirate was to live at the mercy of wind and wave, and no code, no captain, no amount of stolen gold could shield them from it. The tempest stripped them bare, left them face to face with their own frailty, and when the skies cleared, when the ship staggered on toward the horizon, they carried that knowledge with them, that they were alive only because the sea had chosen, this time, to spare them. But the sea remembered. The storms always returned, as sudden and merciless as before. And each time, as the black clouds gathered and the wind began to moan, the crew braced themselves not only with rope and canvas, but with prayers, curses, and rituals whispered into the howling dark. For every pirate knew the truth. Under the black flag, the greatest enemy was not the navy, nor hunger, nor even the blade of a mutineer. It was the storm, waiting beyond the horizon, eternal and unforgiving. Part 3. Brotherhood of the Damned, Blood Oaths, Mutiny, and the Silent Horizon. Every pirate ship was a paradox, a floating hell where hunger, storms, and death were constant companions, yet also a place where brotherhood thrived more fiercely than anywhere on land. The black flag drew men who had been broken, betrayed, or abandoned by the world runaway slaves, pressed sailors, criminals fleeing the gallows, and soldiers discarded by kings. They came with nothing but scars and rage, and on the deck of a pirate ship they found something strange: equality of a kind. The code of the pirate ship was not written by kings or priests. It was scratched into existence by desperate men who had learned that survival required order. Shares of plunder were divided by agreement, not birthright. Every man aboard, no matter his past, had a voice in deciding where to sail, when to fight, and how to divide the spoils. Captains were not crowned, they were chosen, and just as quickly they could be unchosen. But this brotherhood was not born of kindness, it was forged in blood. To join a pirate crew was to swear an oath that went deeper than any soldier's pledge or priest's blessing. Some captains demanded the ritual of blood cut across the palm, pressed together with another man's until the wound mingled. Others used rum, forcing new recruits to drink until they could barely stand, their vows slurred but binding. Still others whispered words over the skull and crossbones, swearing to fight to the death beside their brethren or to die by their hands if they betrayed the code. And betrayal was never far. Beneath the laughter, beneath the songs and the shared misery, suspicion always smoldered. Every man aboard dreamed of gold, of freedom, of escape. But greed was a serpent that slithered between hammocks, waiting for the right moment to strike. A man who skimmed a share of treasure, who stole rum from another's cup, or who whispered too loudly of dissatisfaction, risked more than punishment. He risked mutiny. Mutiny was the storm within. It began with whispers in the dark, when the groaning of the timbers drowned out treacherous voices. A group of men, hungry or bitter, conspired against their captain. Perhaps he had failed them in battle, or grown too harsh with the lash, or simply hoarded too much of the plunder. Resentment gathered like thunderclouds, until one night, blades were drawn, and the ship was torn apart, not by waves, but by its own crew. Some mutinies were swift. The captain was seized, tied, and cast adrift in a small boat, left to the mercy of the sea. Others turned bloody, with pistols firing in the darkness, hammocks slashed open, men stabbed before they could rise. The deck became a slaughterhouse, and in the morning, the survivors swore new oaths over the blood-soaked planks. Sometimes the mutineers thrived, setting sail with renewed purpose. More often, they dissolved into chaos, their brotherhood shattered by the very greed that had driven them to rebellion. And yet, for all the blood spilled, for all the betrayals and deaths, there remained a loyalty among pirates that was rare in the world beyond the horizon. These were men who had no one else. Many had been abandoned by family, enslaved by kings, or cast aside by empires. On a pirate ship, their lives were bound together not only by oaths but by necessity. When cannon smoke thickened the air and enemy ships bore down, a man's only hope was the brother beside him. And in those moments, the bonds of the damned burned brighter than any crown or flag. The brotherhood was kept alive, not only by war, but by ritual. Some crews carved symbols into their flesh, tattoos of skulls, serpents, or anchors that marked them as men of the sea. Others carried charms, bits of rope, bones, or coins taken from the dead beaving. These objects bound them to the souls of their shipmates. At night, around fires on deck, they told stories of battles survived, of treasures lost, of comrades who had gone to the deep. These tales were not entertainment, they were memory, a way of keeping the dead alive and reminding the living why they endured. Still, The horizon held a silence that haunted them. In the rare moments when the sea lay calm, when the sails hung loose and the world seemed suspended, men stared into the endless blue and felt the weight of their own damnation. Few pirates dreamed of dying in their hammocks. They knew their fates: a bullet in the chest, a blade in the gut, a rope around the neck at the gallows, or the cold embrace of the sea. Freedom beneath the black flag came with a price, and that price was eternity spent outside the world of men. Some tried to outrun it. A lucky few took their share of treasure and vanished into distant ports, buying farms, taverns, or new identities. But more often, greed or guilt dragged them back to the sea. The Brotherhood called to them, louder than any church bell or promise of land. They had become creatures of salt and storm, incapable of living on land. For them, the horizon was both a curse and a calling. When the end came, it was often quiet. A man might fall sick, his body wasting as the ship pressed on toward its next prize. There was no graveyard, no priest. His body was sewn into canvas, weighted with stones, and slid into the sea as the crew bowed their heads. Sometimes they sang, sometimes they cursed, sometimes they said nothing at all. The ocean swallowed him without ceremony, as it always had. Other deaths were violent. Mutiny, ambush, or capture left men hanging from gibbets along the shore, their bodies swaying as a warning to others. The black flag might strike terror into the hearts of merchants and kings, but when captured, pirates faced no mercy. They were paraded through the streets, mocked, and finally executed, their corpses displayed until the gulls stripped them bare. Yet even then, their brotherhood endured in memory. Tales of their defiance spread through taverns, whispered by sailors who dreamed of freedom. The world called them criminals, demons of the sea, but among themselves, they were brothers of the damned, bound by blood, oath, and the silent horizon. In the end, life aboard a pirate ship was not romance but a crucible. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, storms battered their bodies, and suspicion tore at their trust. But in that crucible, a brotherhood was forged that defied empires. They were outcasts, but they were together. They were damned, but they were free. And when the horizon swallowed them, when the storms claimed their ships and the gallows claimed their necks, their legend endured. Not as heroes, not as villains, but as men who had chosen to live and die beneath the black flag. Until next time, stay safe and see you in the next history.